The dragon flew towards the city and stopped near it. On the back of this dragon was a child named Age. The dragon turned to him and told him that they were almost at the academy. From now on I would be in a crowded place. Eddard smiled and asked what kind of adventures awaited him there. A child was abandoned in the mountains as a sacrifice shortly after his birth. He was raised by the legendary ancient dragon for 12 years. Anyway, the boy knew nothing about the miracles that awaited him. As soon as the child came down from the mountain, he would find himself in total darkness, among all living beings. Only he could boast of having an extremely high magical power. For thousands of years he was feared, as he was the most powerful being in this world. It was an ancient dragon. The old dragon was completely forgotten, and felt only one emotion, fear. The dragon thought that this was simply impossible. Why was he shaking all over? Was he really scared? Abandoned at the foot of the mountain, there was only a small child in front of him. The dragon looked at the little one and thought, but why does so much magic come from this tiny creature? He had already lived 1,000 years, but this was the first time something like this had happened. Although his end was near. He wondered, what the hell is going on here? He sighed and said quietly, "You're old enough, right?" Then he smiled and said, "I think it's old age. How long has it been? It seems that even my feelings are failing, but this is not the time to think about nonsense." Throughout history, humans are one of the few beings that dragons have encountered. And all thanks to his incomparable ability to control magic. If you think of dragons as a thing, they are more quantitative than qualitative. Already with humans, everything happens differently. The ability to perform magical manipulations, and the total magical power that this boy possesses, are half of all this, which is much more than an ordinary dragon. In the future, this guy will be able to master the upper magic. With the magical power of a dragon, you will be able to use human magic without restrictions. He will turn into an amazing monster, and this idea scared the dragon a lot. So, he decided to destroy the child, and told him that he should not hold a grudge. But as soon as the dragon raised its huge claws to kill the child, the boy just laughed. The dragon was paralyzed, surprised, and thought, he is laughing. The boy took the giant claw in his little hands and started playing with it. The dragon was speechless and thought, does he really think he's joking with me? After that, the dragon laughed out loud and said, I understood. So, I'm going to raise this child. Fortunately, children tend to see their parents as they do, especially when it comes to caregiving. If he's going to turn into a monster, that's why he'll need allies on his side. And besides, this guy is just empty hopes and thoughts. But, could Izzy prolong her life with magic? Would you trust your future with such a child? He was her only real hope. Then he appointed Idar and put all his trust in him. So, a year has passed. Idar was already in the dragon's cave and started to get to work. The dragon got distracted from his work and asked if the little one was hungry. And what should he give for food? Then, he seemed to remember something and assumed his human form. She transformed from a dragon to an ordinary woman, which left the boy very surprised. The woman picked him up and told him that the transformation to human made her look even younger than she thought. After that, she appeared and told him that she had some breast milk for him. Eddard began to drink with gusto. The woman kept looking at him and commented that he was hungry, right? He must be hungry. Just a second later, the boy walked away and was clearly much better. The woman smiled and asked him if he felt a surge of strength, right? And after that, Idar just took off and ran somewhere as fast as he could. The woman was very surprised and asked if a child could run so fast. He looked out of the cave and followed the path the boy had taken. He shouted at her, at this rate he's going to crash into a tree. But even that didn't stop the boy. Idar simply stopped just before hitting the tree and used his magic, ripping it out of the ground. The woman immediately ran after him, thinking she uprooted the tree. Okay, I expected that, but I wanted to be like that too. Some time later, the child was already old enough. Idar was now 4 years old. The two were sitting in a clearing and the woman said that, finally, she no longer needed to breastfeed. Idar, all proud. I said yes. The woman winked at him and asked if he was sure he didn't want to try one more time. Idar felt very embarrassed and, calling her mother, He said it was no longer necessary. Now I wanted to learn something new. The woman said that she still had a lot to learn, and what she thought about the use of magic. Eder's eyes lit up, and she said, "Magic, right." He ran to the woman, and told her that he really wanted to learn how to do what she did. The woman asked if it was something like dragon's breath or something, but it was too early for him. Idar got upset and asked why. The woman explained that maybe he knew how to make magic circles. But even a dragon needs 2 years to master this technique. Eddard wanted him to give up on this idea, and said he would only know if he tried. The woman sighed and said, "What kind of child are you? I don't think there's much to do. I'll show you some things later." Dar was super happy, and was getting ready to listen carefully to his mother. The woman used her magic, and said that this magic circle was necessary for the dragon's breath. You need to visualize it in your head, and then look in the right direction. The magic would act alone, but it should not aim at the ground. The ideal would be to aim for the sky. The woman thought that if she had the same power as Idar, she could even divide the earth. Idar smiled at him, and said that he understood everything. After that, the child closed his eyes and concentrated. He said he needed to submit. Immediately, he had the same vision that his mother showed him. The woman was stunned. After that, the child was able to use that power. The woman was in complete shock, and asked him to point to the sky. Eddard managed to use dragon's breath. She thought, did she really do it on the first try? What the hell is going on? This power is simply amazing. But even she, despite all her skill, had difficulties at first. This little man's power is magical control. Since then, Idar has received guidance from her mother. The child practices with this magic every day, having a lot of fun with it. On one of those days, he said, "Now is the time, I want to try again." The woman watched all this with horror, and thought, she really liked this, but she will soon run out of mana. Even so, the boy did not stop, and kept studying and practicing with everything he could. One day, the woman came into his room, and asked him what he was doing there. Idar smiled at him, and he said that he was working on his magic grimoire, and that he also learned several magical things. The plowing. He once created an exact copy of her with the help of his magic. The woman asked if it was really sand, as it had incredible strength. Well, it's been 6 years. Idar was already 10 years old, and that day the woman showed him a new spell. Idar carefully observed what he was doing, and asked him what it was. The woman said that this magic was so powerful that even she, with all her power, she couldn't control him, and that would be the last spell she would teach him. It was a life extension spell, and she really wanted him to apply it to her. Idar was terrified and asked him if he was really going to die. The woman said she was only 477 years old, which, in the human equivalent, would be about 5 years. Eddard smiled and thought that was nothing. He said that if she asked him, he would definitely do it. The woman was super happy about that, and Eddard immediately applied the magic he had just learned, which was the same magic to prolong life. The woman said her body seemed to become lighter. It was him, the one she had been waiting for all her life. Could I try again? I had to make it. Idar smiled and said that everything was fine. Soon, they were both exhausted, lying on the floor. The woman said that finally she could live another 10,000 years. Idar seemed very pleased and thanked him. The woman hugged him and told him that he had grown up very fast. He was so small and cute not so long ago. And now I was dealing with such a complex magic. He was a real savior. Ida felt a little embarrassed, and said that he still had a lot to do. And besides, Salvador was more of her. The woman looked at him in surprise. Eddard said he remembered what happened in the mountains. When the adults called him Rimo, they had a horrified expression on their faces. Sister means dream girl in Japanese. Eddard said he understood now that if his mother hadn't saved him, he wouldn't be alive. So, she was the real savior. The woman smiled again, called him honey and told him to hug his mother. Then he squeezed it very hard. Eddard said it hurt, he was going to end up strangling him. Soon after, Eddard went out again to look for his mother. I was already 12 years old. He asked her if she wondered when he would be coming home. He thought he could go about his business normally. Meanwhile, the woman was wandering through the forest, thinking about what Idara would be doing in her absence. She could already imagine him running into her arms, missing her very much, saying that she had been away for 3 days, and that he missed her. Where would I have gone? The woman thought about this when she got home. When he entered, he was surprised to see what Age was doing. He was training again, using his dragon flame magic. The woman was frozen by the surprise, then she was thrown aside by the shockwave of his magic. She fell down and asked what was going on there. Eddard only noticed that she was there and said that she had already returned. The woman asked him what he was doing. Eddard ran to her and explained that he was training fire dragon breath magic. This technique helps to improve concentration and absorption. I thought you could try to do this together. The woman said that even she couldn't do that. The boy looked around and saw the scattered sheets of paper that his mother had brought. He said it looked like he had made a mess there. The woman also looked and said that those were her documents. The boy started to help pick up the papers and stopped at one of them. The woman smiled and said that he had said that he wanted to travel and learn new things. He had a month to prepare, and then an exam would come. I needed to study hard, and then I would take the entrance exam to the Royal Academy of Magic. With a little effort, that when he turned 12, he would enter the academy. That was his plan. The woman said that she knew that in the future, she would have to come down from the mountain and start communicating with other people. Eddard seemed to start worrying about this and said he hadn't prepared until now. Will you be able to handle it? His mother told him not to worry, that if he didn't pass that year, no one else would. And there was a copy of the evidence there for him if he needed it. Eddard took the material and asked how she could be so sure of that. Then he sighed and said that he thought he had no choice but to try hard. So he went to his room and soon began to study seriously. He tried to do a mock test with the book and was quite surprised. He stopped and thought that this was a real test. The material that was there was from books that his mother made him read. And even some questions were more difficult than the ones on the exam. It would definitely pass easily. The woman watched everything closely and thought that she had already overcome so many difficulties. To see him get through all this was amazing, but soon worry took over his head. She said that if Eddard joined the academy, she would no longer be able to watch him grow up and would only see him on holidays. Then, he went into her room and told her to stop and return the book to him. It was all nonsense. He should burn that book and go to sleep. Eddard said that he was fine now, that he would not give up anything. Then the woman said she would try later. 12 years ago, a baby abandoned in the mountains was found by one of the most powerful creatures on earth, who became a loving father. About the Royal Academy of Magic of Ilias, the woman transformed herself again into a dragon to bring Idar to this magical academy. Soon he stopped and said that this was the most he could fly. If people saw a dragon, they would definitely panic. Eddard said he was going to use his flying magic and landed gently. The woman told him to be careful. Eddard said he was fine and jumped off his mother's back. Soon, he successfully landed on the floor and began to take a closer look at the gem. His eyes were shining, and he said that it was the Ilias Royal Academies. This would be the place where he would start his new life. But still, he started to worry again. Of course, he was wondering if he could pass the exam today. But he stopped at the entrance and asked where and how the examination was held. I couldn't even enter without permission. If he got in there, he could cause problems. How would he look his mother in the eyes after that? He imagined the situation, the professors starting to fight with him, saying that anyone who invaded their territory would be abandoned, and that they didn't like people like that in the academy. The child became even more worried. He thought he would be crushed like a gold coin in a hot water bottle. And where should I go? At that moment, a girl came up to him and asked if something was going on. Eddard said he was looking for the registration desk for the exam, but couldn't find it. The girl seemed surprised and said that of course she wouldn't find him there. Adara looked confused. The girl explained that she was at the main entrance and that the search was being carried out there. Idara asked if he could really get in there. The girl asked why not. Eddard didn't know what to say, but apparently the girl guessed and asked if he wasn't from here. Eddard began to tremble. The girl said that she thought so, and he confirmed that she was from mountainous lands. Then everything was new to him. The girl smiled, and said that if that was the case, she would take him on tour. Naver I have to give him was very grateful for this, as it would make his task much easier as soon as he arrived at the reception. The girl asked what that meant. They'd be in first grade, right? Eddard said his test numbers differ by 1. The girl smiled, and said that it seemed like a thing of fate. After that, they found their examination hall. Klassa, where did they go? His first exam was written. Everyone who had already taken this exam already entered the room and sat down. The teacher greeted everyone and told them that they would start the written part, asking them to give the sheets to the person behind them. The girl handed him the sheets to give as a gift, who in a whisper thanked him for showing her everything. The girl replied with the same smile, saying that they should help others if necessary, right? They needed to do the best they could. The boy looked at her a little embarrassed and said yes. And right after, the teacher announced the start of the written exam. After finishing the first exam, the girl stayed in the auditorium, where they were taking the exam, and waited to stay outside. When she heard him, she asked him how he had fared. Eddard said he was a little nervous. But that was what was expected. The girl said that, of course, because the atmosphere here was completely different from what they had at home. Eddard said the questions were mostly similar to the ones he had seen in the 6 articles. Then the girl froze. She knocked on the table and asked him to stop. There were 2 compulsory subjects and 2 out of 4 optional subjects to take the exam. I only needed to make 4. Why did you do all 6? Eddard smiled awkwardly and said he was very nervous and didn't want to miss anything, so he made them all just in case. The girl was shocked and thought that maybe she had decided to complicate her life. Just in case. But there was nothing complicated about it. Eddard said he worried too much and solved everything 5 times. The girl thought she wanted to check everything, but time was running out. She said that now they needed to take the sword proficiency exam. Idar looked at her worried and asked if she was that angry. If everything was fine with her. After that, they left the institution and went to the street, where their second exam was to be held. Some students had already passed the test. The teacher of this exam had already finished evaluating the student and told the next one to come over. Eddard asked what was the scoring system for this exam. The girl said that it was simply impossible to understand here. Everything was a little different. There were several sword combat fields to pass the exam, and it seemed that they were distributed according to their number. Well, she needed to go there, so they would come soon. Adara nodded and headed to the field where her exam was to be held. In front of him, he saw a guy who took out his sword and thanked him in advance. He looked at this student with surprise and thought, could it be that he really brought a sword with him? He looked at the other students and thought that he was not the only one. They all brought sword. But I was not prepared. I had nothing with me. But the examination would soon begin. He began to imagine again how the teacher was going to curse him. Was the professor going to say that, of course, he needed a sword, and that people like him were not welcome at the academy? At that moment, the master told the next person to enter the ring. Idar got down on one knee, completely nervous, and said he was done. The teacher asked what was happening to him. Idar said he forgot the sword. He would be forgiven for that, right? The teacher, nervous, said that he didn't need to worry so much. They already had swords ready for the exam. I should go to the shelf and get one for him. Idar calmed down a little and said that everything was fine. He went to the shelf and saw a mountain of swords that had already been used. The boy asked if the others had already trained with those swords. Were all the swords like that? After that, he turned to the master again and asked if he could make himself a sword that met all the requirements. There was no weapon on the shelf that was good for fighting. The teacher was very surprised, but he looked at him and told him that it was not against the rules. Eddard thanked him. The professor thought to himself that he was the kind of student who would find loopholes in the rules to take advantage of them. But he couldn't blame him if he failed. Eddard smiled and said that since he had received permission, he was going to create a super strong sword. To do this, I needed to combine 2 things. Then he used the magic he learned from his mother. The professor was horrified and said it was wind, more precisely wind magic. This was unbelievable, it couldn't be real. Soon after, Eddard created a sword for himself. Teacher, surprised, thought, could I really do this? Was I sleeping, or was it just my imagination? Idar evaluated his sword, and said that it was excellent, both in weight and strength. The teacher, not realizing what had just happened, said that he was ready. Was it not so? So, when does the duel begin? Eddard said yes and thanked him in advance. Then he went on the attack. The professor dodged the blow, and said that he had a well-trained movement, and that his speed was excellent. I knew he was different from the other students. However, the examiner attacked him from behind, and asked if he was not going to fight with all his might. But the child did not find it difficult to block this attack. Meanwhile, the girl had already finished the exam, and said that everything went much faster than she expected. He remembered Idar, and asked if the child had been doing well. He could put all his strength into training. Maybe he was trying to achieve some specific goal. At that time, he went to the kidney where Dar was going to fight, but what he saw was totally unexpected. The master was crying and looking at his broken sword, the result of his battle. Hatter apologized and said he tried to hit carefully. The girl was completely in shock. He thought that the examiner was impressed and upset at the same time. He even went to the front and asked her what she had done there. Eddard said they crossed swords, and the examiner could not cope with their strength. The girl thought it looked like he hadn't seen her, and asked him what was wrong with his sword. Idar grimaced, and said that he alchemized it on the spot, that it was just a normal sword, and that there was nothing wrong with it. The girl asked him if he had really done it alone, and if he could see the sword. Idar handed her the sword and said of course, but the girl could barely hold the sword, and said how heavy it was before she fell. After, Idar was not surprised at all, and said that, of course, the girl said that the sword was incredibly heavy. What did he do with her? Eddard picked up the sword with ease, and said that he had made it with an alloy of orichalcum and diamond. The girl was speechless, she could not even comment. Hatter said that, by alchemical transmutation, he created a combination of air, which in theory could be called the strongest combination of elements. The girl did not even try to understand all this and said that she did not understand anything that he was saying. Did I really need to study at this academy? At this moment, the examiner came to his senses and thought, what was this guy thinking? Making a sword out of the hardest and purest metals, and yet he created it so easily. The sword made by a skilled blacksmith could not stand it, besides he was very angry because his own sword had broken. He asked how one sword could break another. Age replied that if you look closely, the specific gravity of the insane is about 15, weighing about 300 grams. That's 15 times the weight of gold. The examiner said that if that was really the case, then the weight of the sword would be. Idar had already read everything in his head and asked, and as for 65 kilograms, right? The examiner, along with that girl, walked away from him at the same time. They asked him to stop waving the sword like that, otherwise he would end up beheading them. The examiner said, okay, you passed, you must be preparing for the next exam. Dar probably felt a little embarrassed by this and said no. Why do you think you need a rematch, if possible? Of course, the examiner was categorical and said that he was not going to get a rematch. Probably because he doesn't have the opportunity, so now he comes out. And finally lunch arrived. Idar and that girl decided to have lunch together. The girl said that the Magic Academy will see that it was a place that she did not think was real, and said that it was in a place that she had always admired a lot. This is not a dream, is it? The girl said that the Historical Academy has the best teachers, and that graduates achieve brilliant results in science and society. If only it had happened, would he have been able to achieve his dream? But apparently Dar wasn't listening, as he was still in shock from what happened in the second exam. The girl said it was fine, that honestly, he was the only one who could beat the examiner, so it was fine. Age replied that he knew that, but that it was not a test to win. Would he be expelled after this? I didn't want to tarnish his reputation. His result would be the worst possible. The girl tried to support him, and told him that it was okay because next time she would definitely try. Eddard took a sandwich as a snack, and asked if the next exam was about magic, right? The girl replied that yes, and that there are two different assessment methods. Eddard said that reaching a goal is a test of magical attack skills, while creating objects is creative, right? The girl said that it was exactly that, and that she could pass the attack magic test herself, since she practiced a lot. Eddard said he thought I should try the creative part, not because I was good at creating magical attributes. The girl remembered the sword she created again, and said yes, she didn't care much about the extra points for creativity, did she? Age replied that he would not miss the opportunity to take advantage of this approval. The girl asked him if he was really sure about his choice. Idar looked at her surprised, and asked her why she was asking that. The girl said that, of course, the point system was quite good, but that the final grade was decided by the examiner himself, and that they could lower your grade internationally. Apparently, Idar was not too alarmed by this and said that he still believed that he was making the right decision. I needed to take advantage of this opportunity. The girl did not argue with him, and told him that, since he had decided that way, she would not insist, but asked him not to exaggerate. Okay. Darcy got goosebumps, and said that everything would be very different. There they said goodbye for a while. The girl said she didn't know her name yet. Her name was Cecilia, and she was very happy to have had fun with him. The boy also introduced himself, and said his name was Dar, and thanked her for her help. Cecilia said she really hoped they were still in their first year. Idar asked about his classmates, right? Did he really think that they were going to pass this exam with all their might? He sighed deeply, and said that his negative attitude had returned. And then, he started his third exam. The examiner had already gathered everyone in the room, and said that they were going to take a magic exam now. It was a room for creating magic objects, and there were few students this year. Why would it be? I really wanted to see more candidates. He even prepared some bonuses in the form of points for them. What was I waiting for? Eddard looked at the examiner, surprised, and thought, what does this mean? Should those points be taken out to get attention, or what? The examiner recovered, and said that they should now explain all the details of this exam. They only had 1 hour, and with the help of the magic stones in front of them, they had to try to create a magic item. Basically, that was it. They could look for other materials, and at the end of the class, they need not be ashamed to take what they need. He completely concentrated and thought, it's not that these stones are of high quality, but they can be worked with. He thought, what if I can create the perfect magic object with these stones, and get not only the highest score, but also extra points? It will be difficult to correct mistakes in the fencing exam, but there is always a possibility. I was sure it would work. And from there his fun academic life would begin. It would happen for sure. That moment, the examiner announced the start of his examination. The next day, in the staff room, the teacher who administered the fencing exam asked the girl if she was sure what he was. The girl replied that yes, of course, that she remembered his face. The two teachers were talking about age. The man said that, in the written exam, where the minimum mark was 65%, Hadid got the highest mark in all 4 subjects. He also took 2 extra subjects. Although it was not necessary, he also got the highest grade in them. The girl commented that, as for the fencing exam, she created an alchemical sword from an alloy of orichalcum and diamond, literally out of thin air, and used one hand to restrain it. Is he really human? At that moment, the examiner who had administered the last exam entered the staff room, and told them to listen carefully. He brought with him an object created by the exam students. And he said that this article was created by one of the candidates yesterday, a device to control gravity. Hard to believe, right? He always thought that this existed only in theory. 2 other examiners looked at the object, and thought that this object was definitely made by that child. The man from the last exam said that he wanted to give the child more creative points than usual. It would be nice, wouldn't it? The fencing examiner said that he could give at least 10,000 points, since the boy is going to be a special candidate anyway. Thus, for the first time since the academy was founded, one of the candidates achieved the highest score, with such incredible results. Idar passed the exams perfectly, but I didn't know it yet. He tortured himself with silly thoughts after the exam. But that's a completely different story. After the exam, he returned to his mother, and was very worried about the results. He locked himself in his room and asked her why she had sent him there. If he failed, he would have to retake the exams all his life. But the woman, on the contrary, was satisfied and asked if her wish would really come true. 2 days after the results were announced, in the dining room of the Royal Academy, Edgar was preparing his lunch and looking for an empty place to sit. He looked around and commented, "It's so empty that it looks like there are new students, right? It's not that bad." And then, he didn't realize that another student was coming towards him, and the two ended up bumping into each other. It turns out that it was Cecilia, the same girl he met on the exam. The two were very happy to see each other, and sat down together at the same table. She asked him if it had happened. Also during the test I smiled with all my might and said that I was just like him. And at the same time, he called him a disciple of Idar, referring to him with you. Idar looked at her all curious, and asked her why she treated him like this, with such courtesy. Celia explained, and said there was no other way. Who was one of the 3 special students this year, an amazing guy who got the highest grades. Harrod began to get nervous at his words, and asked what was so strange about that. She told him to call her, because she was the same Cecilia who was with him during the entrance exams. The girl could hardly contain her laughter, and, after that, apologized, saying she just wanted to make fun of him. Harrod, somewhat offended, turned his back, and said that, at that moment, he focused on the plaque that was hanging on the wall. On the board, there was a notice for all the students of the academy, saying that they had to learn the most advanced architectural skills, and that the bamboo construction company was offering a 1-day internship. It was said that his mother had said about it. Cecilia looked up from her meal, and looked at him blankly. Arad remembered what his mother said, that even when he was studying, he was going to meet Gaku. And he would have to work hard if he wanted to achieve great results. Arad said it is important to try everything for his own future. Cecilia smiled and asked if her mother was really a nice person, right? Hara immediately replied that of course she is super cool, and the best in the world. Cecilia said yes. What did she understand? The girl thought to herself that he said his parents were the best, but that, in reality, he admired his mother much more. Harold said he still couldn't imagine working in an office. Cecilia pointed to the same booth, and asked what could be done to register. After his words, Harold jumped out of his chair, and said it was this. He had decided he was going to try to sign up. He had never done anything like this, but he was going to do the best he could. Cecilia decided to make another joke. "Just don't do any stupid shit like you did during the test. Hey, people are still commenting on him." Irat asked her to stop talking about it already. At that moment, a girl with long blonde hair came up behind him, and Irat noticed. He turned to look at her, and the two of them stared at each other. The girl also froze and stared at him. Harold turned a little red, and thought, "Wow, she's looking at me, how beautiful." After that, the girl quickly turned around and left the canteen. He smiled and said, "Oh, it was too high, wasn't it? He should have said that about me." Cecilia noted something in herself at that moment, and thought that she liked that kind of girls. 5 days later, Harold was accepted for the internship, and arrived at the headquarters of the bamboo company. Harold was very happy, and said that his name was Harold, and that the following month, he would be officially enrolled in the Royal Academy of Magic of Hus. He saw a company hiring poster on the walls of the campus, and his corporate philosophy really resonated with him. That's why he registered. I was very grateful for accepting it. The person who received it said that his words were very valuable to them. Afterwards, they toured the corridors of this audience, and handed out some leaflets. They said that now everyone would receive some documents to review, and after the Oren, they had to move on to the practical part. So they had to pay close attention. Harold began to study the papers carefully, and said that the first floor had to be of durable construction. An alloy of mithril and adamantium is mainly used. The upper floor had to be strong and lightweight, so an alloy of steel and mithril would be used in the construction. Irat read all this in the documents and thought. He said that the front floor, with the alloy of adamantium, probably missile and adamantium would not be used upstairs. Why? But he was interrupted by a guy who came up to him, and told him that it was good for him to question what was written, because this only showed his commitment to his studies, as expected from a COG student. The girl ran to him, and asked, "What is President Urey doing here?" President Urey said that he had come there for an internship, and that it would be rude not to take the opportunity to meet with him. About what he said, he asked to turn the page. Work always requires a budget, that is, the amount of money that can be spent is always allocated in advance. And he himself should know that the adamante is a super valuable and expensive metal, so they could not use it due to the limited budget. Harold looked at the president doubtfully. And he asked if the Tim gesture couldn't just be created, that it wouldn't take so long. President Uriah looked at him very surprised, and asked him what he was talking about. What was I going to do now? Harold used his magic, and created right in front of the president, saying, "This is how it's done." President Uriah was completely surprised and asked, "What the hell?" Harold said that he thought that, under other conditions, they would need more material, and then the financial cost would be almost zero. President Uriah said it was a joke. I didn't think Dimension could be produced so easily. They could only verify its authenticity by touching it. After taking the material in his hands, he said he couldn't believe it, which was actually an adamantium alloy. But how was this possible? Was he really that good at magic? Irat said that it wasn't like that it was an atomic transformation. He made a league out of nothing. Was the president astonished? So, does that mean we can use this material by just pulling it out of thin air? Harold replied very calmly that yes. The president despaired and said, "This technology will shake the foundations of the construction industry. What's your name?" The boy introduced himself and said his name was Harold. The man said that he was very happy to meet him, and that now they were going to pretend that this internship never happened. He had special skills, and was no longer needed as an intern. Thanks to him, they were able to develop their business. Could you talk about this in person? Harold, surprised, thought yes, of course. President Yuri said that he would not accept or not, that he did not want to miss this opportunity. He told her to go to the warehouse. Harold said it looked like he didn't have much of a choice, did he? After that, he went to the warehouse with President Jur. Harold looked around and thought, wow, what a great space, what could he expect from the kingdom's leading construction company? The president approached him and asked, he wanted to know, how much of this league can you do? The boy thought and said that it was probably 1,000 cars. The man was surprised and said, "Mill. Is it even possible?" Harold was surprised by her reaction, and thought it was no big deal. President Uriah said that he was fine, that he understood everything and believed in him. The boy was surprised, and asked if he didn't even need to convince him of that. She thought she had imagined many cars. President Uriah said he now needed to know if he accepted ERP. Harold was incredulous, and asked if the president really thought he was worth all that. He himself thought that he had learned this while playing with his mother. President Uriah said his skills were worth much more. Harold said they could start then. President Uriah said he was counting on him. After this, Harold easily created a whole mountain of this material. President Uriah was completely in shock, and stood with his mouth open. And I said, wow, this is amazing. After that, the president quickly ran away, and shouted to the boy to wait for him there for a while. Irat just saw the president running away surprised, and said he was fine. President Uriah ran down the corridor, where he met his team. Someone told him not to run down the hall. President Jur apologized, and said he had a very important matter. Another employee of his said that coffee had been spilled on his clothes. President Uriah apologized again, and said he would buy a new one, he wanted to. Harold waited there, listening to the screams. Shortly after, President Uriah returned with a strange suitcase. The man was exhausted, about to fall. Irat got scared, and asked her if she was okay. President Uriah placed the suitcase in front of him, and apologized for keeping him waiting. Irat said everything was fine. Then the man opened the suitcase, which was full of gold, and said that would be the payment for all this, a 3-pointed ring. 7 billion cuckoo and gold coins. Irat said there was a lot of gold there. President Uriah apologized, and said that due to budget constraints they could only offer this, so he asked him to forgive them. Irat immediately hid all the gold, and smiled at the president again. President Uriah observed her reaction, and said that somehow she seemed to be happy about it. As the president of a large corporation, he had to make sure that the child was happy with everything. He patted Harold on the shoulder, and told him that he would think of more ways to apologize, and that he would be grateful if he gave him more time. Harold was very surprised, and thought that there really could be another reward. He told the president that it must be very difficult to be president. The president replied that the bigger the company, the higher the salary, but also the greater the stress. He had the responsibility of carrying the future of all employees and their families on his shoulders. Arap thought about this and remembered his mother, wondering how she would be. Then, he turned to the Euro president and told him that he really was an exceptional business leader. Irat himself thought that he did not know if he wanted to become like him. President Ure said that he has always strived to achieve this. Talent is human capital, and employees are the company's greatest asset. At that moment, two people entered the warehouse, looking at Harold with a somewhat hostile expression, as if they already knew how to make a mess of him. Harold immediately became alert when he saw their strange expressions. President Ure asked what they were doing there. He apologized and said they couldn't come in. The boy came forward and said that it was very cold, but that they wanted to talk to Arodasos. President Ure also got tense and said it was a lack of respect, asking what they wanted. The boy smiled out of the corner of his eye and said that it was useless to work non-stop for a small profit. The girl took out the internship advertisement that Harold had come to look for and said that it had also been found. Then they came up with a brilliant idea. If they kidnapped him, they would make a fortune from the ransom. Immediately, two students attacked President Ure. The president didn't know what to do. But Arad came to his aid and used atomic transformation. Right in front of them, a Congo wall, the diamond fortress, was formed, against which the two students crashed. The girl hit the wall face first and fell to the ground. The boy got scared and told him to get up. Harold said he found it difficult to talk, because he didn't even touch the wall. After that, the man himself destroyed the wall and said that President Ura was tense and was very kind to his colleagues, and who really respected him. Even the toughest ones could not compare with what the president gave to his employees. Well, he was already ready to face his enemies, and that was his advantage. The kid obviously got tense after that, because now he understood that it would not be so easy. Soon he lost consciousness from so much fear. Harold finally managed to relax and asked the president if he was hurt. President Ure said he was fine and thanked him. And he looked at that boy, thinking that he knew more than just alchemy. His fighting skills were also on another level. What else didn't I know about him? At that moment the team arrived to provide assistance. They broke into the warehouse and said security had arrived. What was that noise? President Ure replied that it was just a small problem, and asked them to think that the child had solved everything. A month passed and Aro and Cecilia were in first grade, in their first class. The teacher greeted him and said he congratulated everyone for signing up. Cecilia and Harold were in class A. During recess, a girl came up to him and asked what they were doing together. I was very happy to see him again. Harold nodded and said yes. Cecilia asked how the internship had been, if she had done anything wrong. Harold tensed up and said he had received a job offer. The girl was completely surprised and said that it was no wonder. There was no way I wouldn't get the proposal. Harold said it was his luck. The stars aligned. Cecilia said they took everything into consideration because of her special student status. Harold said she always did that. The boy looked out of the window and thought that, honestly, he needed to work there on the floor. It seemed as if he had never left the cul-de-sac in which he lived in the mountains. But now I would be with the guys in the gym. I really hoped to get along with them. At that moment, a student came up and asked if he was the star student. Harold looked at the surprised student and said, apparently, yes. The boy smiled and said it was good that he was there because he really needed me to do something for him. It was obvious that Harold was not happy about this and wondered if he would have to do something for others again. He looked at the frightened boy and asked him what it was. The boy continued with the same arrogant posture and said he would talk later. Then, the guy extended his huge hand, and Harold automatically covered his face with his hands, thinking the guy was going to hit him. But he just took her hands gently and said he wanted her to make adamantine modifications. Her face immediately changed, became softer, and her eyes shone. Harold continued to look at the surprised student and asked him what dumbbells were or whatever. The guy said that was it, and he took two dumbbells from somewhere, started pulling, and said that, as Harold could see, He always kept his shape. Harold looked carefully, and thought if the guy was carrying these dumbbells all the time. The guy got a little upset, and said lately the dumbbells were getting too light, and he needed strength exercises. As he said this, he kept swinging the dumbbells all over. Harold tried to walk away. He was worried that the guy was going to hit him with the dumbbells, and he thought he shouldn't swing them like that. The guy stopped, put the dumbbells on the table, and said that he had once seen Harold make a Mantina alloy sword and defeat the examiner. It was a legendary thing. The guy talked about it with such enthusiasm, as if he was already a fan of Harold. Harold was not very happy about this and asked if he too was now a legend. Cecilia immediately joined the conversation when she heard about the sword and asked with the same enthusiasm if she had seen all that. Harold was scared. Why did you expect that from your new friend? The girl now started talking to the guy as if she didn't care about Harold. Cecilia said that she was jealous and asked if she could tell him everything in detail, that she was super sad, that she couldn't see it with her own eyes. The boy smiled and said that there is no problem. Harold said that maybe that had been enough. After that, the man turned to Harold again and asked him about the dumbbells, saying that he was not asking him to make them for free, that he would pay for the help. Harold thought it sounded like a conspiracy. Cecilia asked if she could do it properly and that she would supervise the whole process. Harold asked why he was teaming up with him, but still the guy saw no reason to refuse and said it should be like that. He himself thought it was better than it could be. The boy smiled again and thanked her. And soon after Harold began to create the dumbbells that he had ordered. He did several dumbbells and asked the guy if he was okay. He made different weights so he could choose whatever he wanted. The guy looked at everything delighted and said that it was amazing and started trying each of them, saying that these dumbbells would fit perfectly, which he loved. Harold said he was happy to hear that. After that, he turned to his storage magic and said that was it. Then a kind of portal appeared in front of him and began to move inward, saying he thought he was in there somewhere. Cecilia and the boy looked impressed at the same time, thinking that it was not a surprise that he also controlled the storage magic. Shortly after, Harold took a tool from inside the portal and said he was here. The boy and Cecilia looked at him confused, because it was the first time they had seen this kind of device. The boy asked what that was. Harold had already begun to investigate him and said that now he would find out on his own. After that, all the dumbbells and even themselves began to float in the air. Cecilia was shocked and said that it could not be. Harold smiled and said yes, it was a gravity manipulator, which he could use several times and include in the dumbbells as an added benefit. The guy said he didn't think you could give stuff like that for free. At that moment, the teacher came into the classroom and asked everyone to sit down. These 3 students stood frozen, staring at the teacher who had just entered. I still knew the effect of the gravity manipulator. The teacher, named C, said he understood they were anxious as it was the first day. But at least try to calm down and sit down. Harold, Cecilia, and the boy quickly apologized and said they were very sorry. After greeting the teacher, Harold and the others began to talk to each other. Harold and his new friends had already introduced themselves and returned to their seats. At that moment, the teacher called the next student to come to the front of the room and introduce himself. The girl got up and said she was fine. The boy immediately noticed her beauty and turned to Harold and asked him if he thought she was incredibly cute. Only after his words did Harold look in the direction of the girl. She smiled and said that she was very happy to meet everyone and that her name was Jasmine Balvari, who really hoped to be able to help her father, who was the president of BAM Company, because she really wanted to leave this gym. Iris recognized the girl immediately. She's the same girl from the canteen, so she's President Bree's daughter. It makes sense now, he has great connections. The boy asked Harold if he wanted to meet her, since she was beautiful. Harold rolled his eyes and said he probably wouldn't even try. Why didn't you want this to interfere with your work? The boy was surprised and asked what job that was. Harold obviously didn't want to talk about it, so he asked if it wasn't time for him. The guy only came back to reality after his words and said that of course, his name was Janel Husey. That he was very happy to meet Haruto. He took the new dumbbells and said that his hobby was sports, and who was also the first prince of the country. Herod didn't even know how to react to that and thought, is the boy a prince or what? I should have started there. At that moment, the teacher called himself the next student. And Herod rose up from his seat and presented himself also. He told the whole class that he came from a place deep in the mountains. The teacher interrupted and said that he had heard that Herod made a special impression on everyone. Herod took a deep breath and thought that next to the first prince and the president's daughter, it would be difficult to stand out in the academy. After a while, the first class ended, and Herod was sitting alone at his table, reading a book. He was super focused and thought, magic elements have both wave and particle properties. Then John came up to him, who was training nonstop, and called him a nerd, and told him they should train. Herod looked up, and thought there must be an explanation for this. Ian asked what I was reading with such enthusiasm. Herod replied that the book talked about the relationship between the magical elements and the waves. Ian asked what these elements and waves were. Herod explained that the magical elements have the same properties, which means that if you defeat your opponent's magic with an anti-phase spell, theoretically any spell can be countered. Ian said he didn't understand anything she said, and asked her to explain it to him in a simpler way. Herod rolled his eyes and thought, what is that? Then he said that he should present the magical elements as a cog in a wheel. Ian was surprised and asked what these gears were. Herod explained that they were two identical, but that if you put them together they would stop moving. Now, instead of gears, he asked Ian to understand the magical elements. Ian said he understood and commented that if you divide the muscle groups, you can train each of them effectively, which is great, right? But he said no. Why was Estebanatu? John hugged him and told him that, after training his mind, it was time to train his body as well. Haruto thought about how annoying John was. John said they were having the same class tomorrow. Later, at the academy's training center, the professor of the new subject said that they would have a practical magic combat class today, where they would need to split into pairs and fight in a simulated battle for an hour. Everything was very simple. They would evaluate the combat skills to form a pair. The evaluation criterion would be the ability to defend oneself. And for those who passed creative test, and for the others, they would start with a special student. Herod came forward and said that everything was fine. When they pronounced his name, everyone realized that he was now going to show off his abilities, and began to talk about him, which clearly did not please Herod. The boy said it was the first time he was going to see a fight up close. The girl asked him if he was good at fighting. Herod was very tense and scared, and his companions were also looking at him, expecting some kind of show, which made him very nervous. I really didn't want others to see this. He also looked at Jasmine, who, like everyone, was admiring everything, and he thought that even Jasmine was looking at him. And he didn't want her to see how uncomfortable he felt. And it looks like he was really worried, which only made him more nervous. But two of his closest friends supported him in every way, and did not even hide it. He already told Cecilia that it was his son, who managed to create the gesture tends to nothing. Cecilia supported him, and told him it was true, calling him Prince, and asked him what he was going to do this time. Arata was not happy at all with this. He looked at them with disgust, and thought that all this was a joke. The teacher got angry and said that they were both very noisy. After that, he turned to Harold, and told him that they were going to start the serious part. That he was going to increase the power of magic with each blow, then he would have to focus on defense. Harold said what he understood, but he thought he would do the best he could, although he wasn't sure that the reverse phase would block his magic. The teacher said it wouldn't be easy. Harold looked at her in surprise and asked if that was it. The woman prepared for the attack and said that they would start with a stronger blow. Harold got very nervous and asked why they didn't do it little by little. The child was terrified, scared, and thought there was no other way. He used his analysis and thought he could see everything. After, he calmed down and acted with more confidence. He put out his hand to block the blow and thought it was reverse magic, activating it. The teacher smiled and said they would see if he could handle it. But the boy countered his attack easily, without even moving from his place. Everything happened so fast that no one understood anything, as if nothing had happened. For a moment, even the teacher froze, surprised. After that, he asked, "Didn't the magic work?" Am I dealing with a monstrous student? The woman began to feel nervous and worried. Harold felt a little offended by this and thought, monstrous. I hadn't imagined it, but I'm still satisfied with myself. He thought that, at least, his hypothesis was correct. He decided to review what he read in the book and in the lesson, although it was a little dangerous, but clearly not for Harold. J.N., who was lifting weights all the time, said he was very happy, and said it as if he was already used to Harold's skills. Cecilia agreed with him and spoke. Yeah, he did something again. Jasmine stammered a little and said it was so amazing, they weren't going to understand that, right? The girl was seeing it for the first time. Then you could see that for her, it was something incredible. Aeon apparently did not mind at all and, with the same smile, continued training. He told Jasmine that she was right. Harold looked at this, clearly not very happy with what he saw. He thought they shouldn't bother Jasmine, everything was against her, but apparently the teacher didn't want to stop there. As he did not want to lose against the student, and told Harold that he was sorry that everything had happened like this, but that they would try again. Harold was not prepared for this at all, and already wanted to say something, but since he was very nervous, he could not organize his thoughts, but he said he could try again. The woman did not let him finish, and did not explain anything to him, she just attacked him immediately. But, despite the fact that he was very nervous, Harold managed to block the master's attack again. Or rather, the same thing happened the first time, as if the woman had not been able to use magic against Harold. Then everything went back to how it was before. The teacher was very confused, and asked, "What the hell happened to my magic?" Not even the other students said anything, they were all in shock. After that, several attempts followed, but in the end he never managed to hurt the child in any way. Erode was still there, as if nothing had happened, and all the other students were frozen as well. Without understanding anything, Harold, seeing the teacher's reaction, ran to her and was about to say something. But the woman interrupted him, saying that he was being useless. But he also called his teacher. He wiped away tears and said he would quit smoking that day. With all this, Harold did not want this at all, but it still made the poor woman cry. The other students were shocked by this statement, thinking that it even made the woman cry. Everyone was paralyzed. Harold was surprised. Why didn't he want that? And I told the teacher that she didn't need to quit so soon. The woman said she couldn't go on like this. Why? What's the point of learning from someone who doesn't know how to deal with magic? Harold said it wasn't really that, it just interfered with the activation of the magic, that's all. She was still looking at him in surprise. The teacher got very angry and said it was disrespectful. Harold felt even more uncomfortable and apologized. The teacher came up to him and started cursing. He asked how he had interfered with the activation, how did this happen? Harold was trembling nervously under the pressure of the teacher, and said that he had read about it in a book and decided to give it a try. The woman said that she should try it too, but then she calmed down a little and said that by interfering with magic circles like that, and because she managed to master this technique at such a young age, she asked him not to use it anymore. Harold shook his head and said it wasn't that. He had discovered a different way of using magic. The woman looked at him curiously. Harold explained that what he did was not as difficult as a magical intervention. He simply neutralized magic by hitting it with an element in the opposite phase. Magic is strong, but not that powerful. It was a simple pain technique. The woman started yelling at him again, asking what he was talking about. That even that was difficult. Then she gave a deep sigh and said she was tired, so she didn't care anymore. He said his results were still questionable, but he was still a better student. Harold said that this was too vague a result. John smiled and said that was normal, considering all his abilities. Cecilia also smiled and said it wasn't a big deal, right? Harold got mad at them for the first time and asked if they were having fun. At that moment, Jasmine came over and told Harold that she still was, so he didn't need to worry so much. Harold said it was good to think about it. Jasmine smiled and said that's what she was talking about. After all, being the best student was not just an appearance. Harold said no, he was still a long way from that, he had a lot to learn. Jasmine looked at him, a little offended, and asked him why he was only talking to her in a formal way. Harold looked away and said he had reasons for it. Cecilia, who listened to the whole conversation, thought that she was also interested in that. Jasmine told Harold that he didn't need to address her so formally, that there was no problem. Harold called her by name and told her it was okay. Cecilia thought Harold and Lady Jasmine were still talking. And why was she so worried about that? After that, the teacher called the next student to take the test. But a feather fell from the sky directly into his palm. The woman looked at her surprised and asked if it was really a pity. I was really scared about something. And he said he wasn't there, he couldn't be there. Harold came up to her and asked her what had happened. And after that, they looked up and saw a huge faucet. He was a chimerical monster, with an eagle's body and a lion's bottom. The professor was completely terrified, and said that this was the strongest monster, which not even a Rankia adventurer could defeat. But he would have to fly much higher. After that, the griffin roared. The woman addressed the students, and told them to listen carefully. The fights were suspended, they should be very careful. He would catch someone with his claws, that would be the end. But what to do, since it was flying directly towards them? All the students in that class raised their heads and stared at that monster. One of the students said that if I attacked them, it would be over. Another asked if they weren't his prey now. Everyone was terrified, not knowing what was going to happen.